Just wrenching on the back axle here, got the wheel taken off and the brake drum. I already had the whole brake assembly disassembled, but you know, took the dust cap off of the axle here, and yeah, it's always a good sign when there's just a nail in there instead of a cotter pin. But they bent it around so that they could still use the dust cap, so they must have been professionals. The other way you can tell they're professionals was that the hub can move separate from the axle. It must have either wallered out the hub or broke the key or worn the key down funky, because it doesn't spin all the way. And it definitely still works because I drove it. But that sure is peculiar. Alrighty folks, with the front axle all gone through and it should be just about ready to bleed the brakes and get rolling with this thing. I'm just waiting on my hub gaskets to come in for the front end. So we're going to move on to the rear axle here. I'm going to do the exact same thing, tear it all down, see all the things that I need to get for it, get those things, and then put it back together. I'm not in a super big hurry to get this thing out of the shop, so I don't mind taking a little extra time and actually having the correct parts. So here on the passenger side, of course, my hub's already off. It's right here. And this pin that was in there is wrong, I'm pretty sure. I'm going to order another one either way. But you can see there's a lot of play in that pin on there. And then if we slide our hub on itself, that pin's just not right for it. It's not a tight fit. I don't like it. So I'm going to go ahead and order a new pin. My hub should still be good. If not, well, I'll just ignore it. Quality repair advice right here. So yeah, with all this apart, what I'm going to go ahead and do is tear down this side so I know how the other side comes apart. And so I'm going to go ahead and take these bolts off. It's wonderful to see, you know, all the same size and everything, you know. Clearly this has never been touched before. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and pop all those guys off, have a look in here, see what this bearing looks like, because I have my suspicions that either that bearing is completely toasted or it was recently replaced and is actually in pretty decent shape. So we'll see. Alrighty, and with all four of our backing plate bolts out, backing plate comes off, I went ahead and pulled the parking brake cable out of there because the end's been broken off. So that's not really going to be helpful. I was kind of looking forward to having a functional parking brake, but I guess that'll have to wait. So I can go ahead and build my brakes up and get that guy ready. And then I want to pull this out and really inspect this bearing, make sure everything's good with it. And then you can see our four very different bolts that were holding the backing plate on. Things like that about this old Scout just make me laugh, because I like to think that these were all things that came up when it was battling the Alcan Highway, because way back when in the 60s and even the late 70s, the Alcan Highway was still dirt, and it was a legitimate battle to get an old vehicle, you know, like this thing, which was still new at the time. To get something like this up the Alcan was a true battle. Things got absolutely beaten. Roadhouses flourished at the time because they were selling tires and parts and they were fixing things. Like, it was a crazy time. There's a really cool roadhouse that I visited that there's just junk everywhere. Old cars, parts, they're everywhere. I mean, things like this would happen, you know, except they'd be more catastrophic to the vehicle and they'd have to just abandon it, you know. The Alcan Highway absolutely murdered vehicles back in the day. I watched an old news story once that they were talking to a fella, and he said that he set out on the Alcan Highway with his wife. They were in two different vehicles, and they asked him how many tires he went through, or how many spare tires he brought. He said he went through a lot of spare tires, and he said he went through 8 spare tires, and he brought 16 with him. 16 spare tires to take on the Alcan Highway. Like, these old vehicles that took on the Alcan are real troopers. Alrighty folks, we're back in action again. What you guys saw already is that hub is the loose one that needs the new keys. I have those. They should be right here, yep, in my pocket. I went ahead and bought 2 new keys for the axle that locks the hub onto the axle shaft itself. And then you guys saw that this side, I needed a hub puller because this one's on tight. I don't want to mess anything up. So that's where I left off. And while I waited for parts and tools and whatnot to arrive, this thing managed to leak a whole lot of gear oil out of the transfer case and the steering box. So that's rad. But we have tools. Axle keyway keys, I guess. That's what I'm going to call them. My hub gaskets showed up. And while I'm at it, I just wanted to say that this fella, Scouter1 on eBay, he's got an actual website. I think it's Classic Scout Parts. They've supplied quite a few parts for this project. Not supplied because I had to buy them, so you know. I've bought some parts from them. These hub gaskets, that carburetor base gasket, in fact. The clutch slave cylinder and master cylinder rebuild kits both came from them, and some other odds and ends. They've been pretty decent prices. They've got things like nobody else sells the clutch slave cylinder rebuild kit. Everybody just wants you to buy a new one, but of course, you know, if it can be fixed, well, I'm probably going to fix it as opposed to wasting a whole bunch of money on stuff. So, yeah, not a paid advertisement or anything. I just wanted to give a shout out. Scouter1 on eBay or ClassicScoutParts.com. They've been doing me pretty good with these parts, and I really appreciate that. So I wanted to say that. And now that we're done with small businesses, we'll talk about me spending money at the big box stores. Modern day box stores being Amazon, of course. So I picked up a hub puller. This guy was super cheap, and I figured I'll go with a cheap one of these because, well, it's hard to mess up, A, and B, this is the only vehicle that I need this to work for. So I'm a little disappointed to see it didn't come with like a carrying case. But, well, you get what you pay for, right? I picked up two of these differential gaskets. These are a lube locker style. They're just the super cheap diff gaskets. I've had really good luck with lube locker gaskets themselves, and I figured I'd try out the cheap counterparts here because, well, saving money and whatnot. We'll store those there. And then the last thing is the old cheapo slide hammer here. This thing was like 50 bucks, and well, I figured why not. So if I can get it open one-handed here, which apparently is proving to be quite the task. There we go. So I figured this thing's really cheap, but it's really hard to mess up a slide hammer, right? It's a hammer that slides. As long as these threads are good, like you can screw anything onto there and do whatever you want to. So yeah, went ahead, picked up this guy. Just some stuff I figured that I needed and might as well get. And you know it's really good when your hub puller shows up with the old Chinese lettering right on the side. That's real primo right there. So yeah, we'll be able to pull our axle shafts out with this guy, and we'll be able to pop that driver's side hub off with this guy. So good stuff. Alrighty, so locking hubs are on. I just went ahead and threw those on. They're pretty self-explanatory how they install. And then I pulled this axle shaft. Wasn't too sure if or how really the slide hammer was going to work, so I wanted to try it out first. Works absolutely great. And yeah, so our axle shaft is out now. It's just this absolutely tiny little short guy. Bearing looks great. I think I'm just going to clean that up and send it for now. Good old Timken bearing's going to treat me better than any modern bearing. The bearing race looks pretty good too. And if we look in here, try and get my headlamp in there for you guys as well. There we go. You can see that scarring goes all the way in. Something tells me at some point in time, I feel like the axle shaft might have broke all the way down right by the center section there. And then the axle shaft just kind of stuck in there and flopped around until the whole wheel started coming out. And that's why it's got all that scarring that goes all the way out to the edge there. And then, I don't know, something tells me that wheel just went ahead and went there. Just an assumption, but you know, it is nice to piece together the history of this thing, one scar at a time. So yeah, and the other thing I noticed is if the axle shaft broke and they replaced it, they didn't put the seal in. Oop, you can't see that. There we go. They didn't put the seal in, it doesn't look like. And some folks say that if you do that, you can get it to oil from the differential, but you have to overfill the diff to get it to actually flow oil to the wheel bearings. So I don't wholly know about that theory. Like, it's obviously how full floater axles work, but I don't know about these. But beside the point. But anyhow, yeah, axle shaft is out. We're going to go ahead and pull the hub off the other side and try and get that axle shaft out as well. And I'll let you guys watch the process as I go. Okay, we're on the driver's side now, getting ready to pull this axle shaft, and I just want to point out something very nice that I already even noticed. There's supposed to be nowhere near that amount of play, so that's not cool. But yeah, let's get my cheapo Chinese hub puller thrown together here. Alrighty, we're on the driver's side here. You can see I got the old hub off. Use my cheap Amazon hub puller. I can't say it's the worst thing ever, but it definitely is not holding up too great. So, you know, don't buy it if you intend to do this every day of your life. You can see that's to hold on that striking plate. This little nub here is to hold this guy on, and then that slides on, and then you can hammer that to turn it. And it all works pretty good, but that guy, you can see, just completely fell apart in the time that I used it. And then one of these legs here, the little eyelet got stretched out, and it'll pop off every now and then now, so good enough for me, but yeah, like I said, if you're doing this every day, not wholly recommended. So yeah, we can see our bearing there, looks pretty rusty. A lot of in and out movement on the axle shaft, so that's not really cool. And then our this doodad here retains the bearing in there, and the seal was popped out when I got it out, so that's not great either. So definitely a new seal there, doing a seal on the other side. They're 50, 60 years old and dry rotted, so they weren't going to do much anyways. And like I said, I wanted to repack the bearings with goo and whatnot. So yeah, we'll get to getting the slide hammer out and we'll pull this guy out. Whew. Alrighty, driver's side here is apart. This is the long side. And bearing's in okay shape. Worse shape than the other side. The bearing race you can see is pretty rusty. And you can see the one spot that I cleaned up. So theory kind of holds here that something went wrong on the passenger side. And from the looks of it, it broke the axle shaft. And that's why it has those weird marks in it. And then they replaced that bearing. And then as you can see, this side has the inner axle seal, or the inner outer wheel bearing seal, whatever you want to call it here. And that side did not. So they just didn't replace that side. This side's still in here. I would say this side's original. And that side got messed with. The other fun thing about this side is for the brake backing plate here and the bearing retainer, there were only 3 bolts. This bolt down here was missing. So another interesting little fun thing about this. So yeah, and then when I did the brakes long ago, took them apart at least, I broke that brake line there. So that needs to get rebent, but it was already custom made and all weird and wonky, so that needed to get redone anyways, basically. So yeah, fun times. I can finally get to putting my brakes together on these backing plates. I got to pull that parking brake cable out of there, obviously. And then we'll be able to, hopefully soon, maybe get this thing ready for reassembly. Alrighty, so I was just here cleaning up my brake backing plate. This is the one off the passenger side, and the passenger side is the side with the mismatched bolts and the side that has those weird markings in the axle tube. And we've acquired another hint as to what went wrong. You can see the hole where the axle shaft comes out is absolutely wallered out, such to suggest that this thing killed the wheel bearing, and then the axle shaft just rode on the brake backing plate here. So that's interesting and weird. What I find weird is the it's wallered out, worn out on the bottom, but if it was, you know, normal, it would have worn out the top because all that weight's going up. So that's weird that it did that. But anyways, I don't think it'll affect this brake backing plate's functionality at all, so I'm going to send it with that. And yeah, it's just some neat stuff. Just one thing after another. It seems this Scout is, well, it lived a long life, we'll just say that. Alrighty, so we got our bearing all cleaned up and greased up, ready to install it on the axle shaft. And everything that I've read about this process here, everybody says you just throw it on. That's it. So this is a tapered fit shaft, and that's all it is. You don't hammer the bearing on. You don't have to press it on or anything. It just slides on, and that's it. That taper keeps the bearing put, and once it's in the axle, it should work mint. So yeah, otherwise, axle shaft's cleaned up, about as clean as it's going to get. By the looks of this outer here, I think this thing broke the keyway and spun around a lot, and that's why it looks so oddly heat checked, but hopefully it'll work for good enough for my purposes. So yeah, this thing's ready to install. I just got to put my seal in there. Alrighty folks, out here with the Scout project, of course. Got the passenger side axle shaft in here, and one thing that I found is one of those seals over there was wrong. I ordered that one, and here's the that's the proper seal. That's the inner seal, goes in here for this Scout. So if you need that part number, there it is. For whatever reason, everything I was finding said that this 5051S seal was the right seal. It is not. That seal has no place in this axle that I can see, unless it goes way in the axle tube. But we're not there, so for right now, it would be that seal. So now that I've got this guy in here, this one's all set up. I have my inner seal in, and then all I have to do now is put my brake backing plate together, and then I can put this side together, and then I just have to do the exact same thing on the other side. Alrighty folks, it has been long enough. I think it's about time I finish this. I started this in like January. It is April 1st now, so that's awesome. So we have our wheel bearings. They're both greased and both axle shafts are in. We replaced this inner seal. I replaced the diff cover gasket, and now what I'm waiting on is I need to finish reassembling my brakes. So let's go have a look at that. Alrighty, here's what we're looking at on our brakes. It took me long enough to piece all these odds and ends together because when I got this thing, these clips were broken. I had one broken one, I lost two, and I need 4 total to assemble this braking system. Now, for a lot of you that work on these Scouts, you probably do not recognize this braking system. That is because this is the very early 9-inch brake setup that was used on these Scouts. They use these 2 clips to retain the shoes down, and then you have an upper spring and a lower spring. And just like our front brakes, if you guys recall, you have the eccentrics that you can adjust from behind. So you put this on the Scout, and then you put your brake drum on, and then you adjust the shoes yourself. These are not a self-adjusting style like you're probably familiar with literally every single drum brake system being. So this is kind of an unfamiliar braking system for most folks because it was really only used on these early Scouts like mine. And it took me long enough to track down these little clips. And fortunately for me, I found a place selling new old stock clips, and I ordered enough for this Scout because I'd actually ordered some earlier and I ended up losing them. So that's part of what took so long to get all this together. So I'm going to finish assembling these brake backing plates and we'll be ready to bolt them onto the Scout. Alrighty, so we have our backing plate assembled. So this goes on first, and then this plate goes on that holds the seal in it. What I went ahead and did was I took an original bolt. You can tell it's original because it says IH on the top. I took this down to the old hardware store and I picked up a full set of new grade 8 bolts, washers, and nylock nuts. I did that because primarily this side had a strange assortment of bolts. You can see this one has a bigger nut on it. This one had 2 nuts on it. And we had fine thread and coarse thread. So we had all kinds of different nuts and bolts on this side. You can see this one had 2 nuts on it. This one had a much larger nut. This one's coarse. These 2 were fine. I think we might have had 1 or 2 original ones, but yeah, that's a whole mix and match. So I just went ahead and picked up a full new set, so this thing's good to go. So I'm going to throw this brake backing plate on here, and then we'll be ready to put the seal plate on, which is right there on top of the hub, and then we'll be ready to final assemble this. Alrighty, so I might have misspoken and said that the backing plate goes on and then the bearing retainer. It's definitely the other way around, the bearing retainer and then the backing plate. I feel kind of dumb for trying to assemble it the other way, but I figured it out. New hardware looks good, and I don't think it's going to break anytime soon, so that's good, and it's all matching now. I'm sure you guys can see I reused the old brake shoes, and the reason being is this is the very early Scout brake system. They only really used this in 1961, I believe, so nobody makes these new brake shoes, so the only thing I could do about it is have them relined and then arced to the brake drums, which is a great solution, and I will probably end up doing that someday if all of this works as it should, and that is why I did not do that, because as current, I'm probably $15 in these new little clips, and then I bought these new springs, and those were $12, so I'm not all that invested in this, and I only bought these new springs because I lost one, and these, in case anybody is curious, are for a Jeep. These are for a Jeep MB rear brake, I believe. Those had a 9-inch brake system. It's the littlest bit different than the Scout original brake spring, but this one fits just fine, and I'm sure it'll work good. And then I reused the bottom one. So, yeah, all I have to do now is put this hub on, and then the brake drum, and then I'll have to adjust the brake drum. As you guys might notice, this is the same system that we had on the front with these 2 eccentrics that you adjust from behind to set the brake shoes in and out. And this is not self-adjusting like all the drum brake systems that I'm sure everybody is used to, so these are a little weird, but hopefully they work all right on this, and if they don't, well, I'm more than willing to slap a later set of 10-inch brakes off of a newer Scout, because I absolutely hated assembling this. So I ended up having to put the clips on and then get the shoes up under the clips, and then I had to do this spring and then this spring, and that was the order that it all worked the best to assemble this whole thing, and that was awful. So not really recommended, but it's what I have, and well, I'm like 30 bucks into this whole thing to reassemble this, so we'll find out how they work, and I guess I can do a honest guy review on how these darn things worked. And on today's fun episode of Making Things Work, we turn this into this. As you can see, there's quite a size difference there. On the bottom we have the original one, the actually good one that came out of this, and then here we have my modified one, and this is one of the axle keys that I ordered online that said they fit this axle, and well, it does not really fit this axle at all. And as you guys recall, the axle key for this side was all kinds of wrong. This was the key that we took out of this axle, and as you can see, this is the one that didn't fit at all. And the hub was super loose and spun without the axle, and this key doesn't even have the taper on it. As you can see, all of these others have a taper, and this one does not. It's just a square. So we now have axle keys for this thing. So we just drive these guys in, put our nut and washer on, and we should be good to go. Alrighty, well, I'm not sure how noticeable it was in the last video clip, but that was my first test fit of my customized little axle key, and I made it way too small. So I took my other brand new one and I shaved it down and sort of test fitted until I got this, and that's exactly what I want. The key's a nice tight fit in there. Just tapped that guy in, and now when I go to put the nut on here, it will retain this key in there, and everything will be nice, tight, right, good to go, and this thing will be nothing like it was when we took it apart, because this was the one that was super loose. So yeah, now we just put the big retaining nut on and tighten it down, and then brake drum, adjust my brake shoes, and this side will be good to go. And that'll do it for this side. Throw the brake drum on, adjust my brakes, and then I just have to do all this all over on the other side again. Alrighty, smooth sailing over here on the driver's side. You can see brake backing plate and our seal retainer plate are all installed, and axle shafts are in, end plays within spec. One of the catches with the driver's side here is I need to replace the brake line because the end twisted right off when I went to take it off the wheel cylinder. But that's no problem. I got a new line. I just need to bend it up. So we're ready to put the hub on here, and then I'll get the this all assembled, and then we'll bend up our line and throw it on here. Alrighty, and with that, we're all done with our rear axle. You guys see we got the new rubber line in there, and then I bent up the new hard line on the other side. So this rear axle should be good to go. Last thing I need to do is adjust the cams in the back for these brake shoes so they're adjusted right. This one I turned way in to get the shoes all together and all that nonsense, so I'll need to adjust it. And then I think we're in business to bleed the brakes. And with the master cylinder filled with brake fluid, I'm going to go ahead and start pumping the pedal until we get fluid to the passenger rear. As many of you know, of course, you always start when you're bleeding brakes with the wheel that is farthest from the master cylinder. That is usually the passenger side rear. In this instance, because this Scout has sat for so long, I know there's no brake fluid anywhere in the system. I just opened that bleeder, and we're going to pump the pedal until we get fluid coming out, and then we'll tighten it and start the actual process of bleeding the brakes. Alrighty, I went ahead and called my brake bleeding assistant down to give me a hand. On days like today when there's nobody really available to help me, I just use a board. Works a lot quicker and I don't have to bother anybody. So you just pump up the pedal, pin it down, shove your board in there. It's not perfect, but that'll get you into business, so it works. And then we just go around, and I'm on the last wheel here. Hear that nice pop? You can tell it let out a lot of air there. And I think we're in the business of stopping here. There's definitely a pedal. Now I'll probably have to get somebody to help me do a better job bleeding them later on, but for right now that's good enough. And now I can put the wheels back on this thing, get it off the jack stands, and look forward to the next work that I have to do to it. But I'm way happy to have the rear axle sealed up. The brakes are bled. For the first time in probably 50 years, this Scout actually has brakes. It has the potential to stop. It's got new gear oil just about everywhere. This thing is getting there. Next time you guys see it, we're going to be rebuilding the fuel pump. Before I pulled it in here in December, I noticed that my fuel smelled a lot, or my oil smelled a lot like fuel. So the diaphragm in the fuel pump there went, and it's now just letting fuel into the oil, which is not good at all. So I ordered a rebuild kit. It'll be here soon. We'll get that taken care of. And if anybody out there is needing part numbers for the Dana 27 rear axle, comment down below and I can help you out with whatever I can. It will only be part numbers for this particular axle, so that's about all I can do for you guys. But anyways, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking around with the Scout project. I know it's been a long time since the last video was put out about it, but you know, daily drivers and whatnot being what they are, life gets complicated sometimes. So stick around for more Scout content, and thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.